Oh, happy Tuesday. It's Training Tuesday, and we're having a hell of a day here. For those of you who may be in my neck of the woods, right? I'm out in New England. It hasn't stopped snowing. Hasn't stopped snowing at all. And we probably got about almost 2 feet, maybe about 2 feet. I don't know. We've just been shoveling constantly. It's been a long day of shoveling today. And giant branches falling in my yard and fun stuff like that. So it's just been a day. And I was sitting here and I'm like a minute late because usually at 6 o'clock the church bells are ringing. And that's how I know it's my cue to start Training Tuesday. But there's no church bells tonight. And I was like, oh, like for the last few minutes, my ear was like waiting for the bell. Not happening tonight. This snowstorm is knocked out quite a bit here in Massachusetts. So anyway, that's how I spent my morning. I got all dressed up this morning for an early morning meeting. Um, got dressed, did my hair, did my makeup. And then my son got called into work, so I was going to be a nice mom and I was going to help him shovel out because overnight we had a good 18 inches of snow. So there was quite a bit to shovel and we have a fairly long driveway. Um, and that's when I realized that doing my hair and makeup was an utter waste of time first thing in the morning because I came in from the shoveling and kind of had to do it all over again. So, anyway, that was the start to my Tuesday. I hope you guys are having a brilliant Tuesday, this Training Tuesday. So tonight we're going to talk about conflict. And I kind of teased it with like, are we being stubborn? Are we being committed? Like, where are we with all of this? Um, and I wanted to talk about actually being stubborn versus being committed because a lot of times the stubbornness is where conflict comes from, both at home and at work and in the work environment. So I wanted to kind of put that out there sort of to tease you guys, but also to kind of talk about the difference. Sometimes when we think we're being committed, we're just being stubborn. So, and there's a clear difference between the two. So I wanted to talk about that because stubborn stubborn has a clear win-loss scenario tied to it. There is a winner and there is a loser. The stubborn person is digging in their heels because by God they're going to be the winner. That's that's how that plays out. So when I was thinking about this, I was sitting back going, okay, so when is a situation where I have been stubborn? There's a few. There's a few. But I did find that I tend to be more stubborn in my personal life rather than my work life. And I suspect that's because I have slightly different goals in my personal life. And so maybe it's a little easier for me to be stubborn there. But I did think of early in my career, I did think of a situation I learned from where I was being stubborn. And it was an ad campaign I was running. Before I moved into technology, I worked for a newspaper group. I was the marketing director for a newspaper group in the Midwest. And I was running an ad campaign that was supporting one of our products. And the woman who was the head of that product division, she and I had worked on this campaign, and when I showed her kind of how the photos turned out for the ads, she was the one featured in the advertising, and I showed her how the photos turned out, and then I wrote some copy around that and everything, and I was positioning this in a way that I was sure was going to kill it in the market. I was sure this ad campaign was absolutely going to knock it out of the park, and she was not a fan. She was just like, I don't like it. I don't like those photos of me. I don't like the way you've positioned this. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's going to work. I don't want this to run. And I was young, but I was like, but this is perfect. This campaign is perfect. It's going to kill it. You'll see, you're going to be so popular. Your face is going to be known. It's going to be amazing. I did go to my boss and say, so Cheryl is not a fan, but I think this is really great. And he looked at it and he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You and Cheryl need to work this out. At the end of the day, it's your call. You run our marketing, you decide what runs for the marketing campaigns. So I took that as implicit approval to do my thing, and I ran it. I ran the ad. The results were okay. The results were not nearly as spectacular as I thought they were going to be. The response they weren't terrible results, but they were just okay. We've definitely had run other campaigns that were more successful. Pardon me. But the cost of that campaign was my relationship with Cheryl, who was very unhappy that I ran it anyway, was very unhappy that even though potentially it was my prerogative to use her face and her image for selling our products in the way that I saw fit, she felt she should have more of a say. And it put a significant rift in our relationship that never fully got repaired. So the bigger cost for my being stubborn about this being the right way to go was in my relationship with her. And in my ability to then do future campaigns with her where there was trust, mutual trust. Because here's the thing with being stubborn. When we're stubborn, we're focused on the how. We're focused on the result. We are locked in. We want control. Sorry, frog in my throat just before I came on. It's our way or the highway when we're being stubborn. The definition of stubborn, I looked up the dictionary definition and it said dogged determination not to change your attitude or position on something. Dogged. That is stubborn. Now, instead of being stubborn, had I been committed, what's committed? When we're committed to an outcome rather than the path, we yield better results because we're committed to the why. We're committed to the what need, not the how things need to happen, but the what needs to happen, the end result, the why this is important to be, which opens us up for other ideas around how we can get to that end result, how we can get to that better result. If I had been more committed to finding a great outcome rather than doing it my way, right? If I'd been committed to the outcome rather than to the, but I love this way of doing things, then not only could I have worked on a better approach and one that Cheryl approved of, we could have run a really great campaign instead of just an okay one. And I could have had a really great relationship with a coworker rather than a lukewarm one. So that's my story about being stubborn versus being committed, and a great example of workplace conflict that I created out of my stubbornness, right? And my stubbornness came from my ego, which said, I know this will work. This is the way. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and say hello and welcome to Training Tuesday. My name is Natalie Hahn. I am your host and trainer and coach for tonight at Training Tuesday in our group, Accelerating Leadership for Professional Women. It is great to have you guys here tonight. And I see some of you are already saying hello in the chat. So hello to Joyce and Sue and Jackie. It is great to see you guys. And Sue, what would I have done differently in hindsight? I wouldn't have run the campaign. In hindsight, I would have listened to the fact that Cheryl was not comfortable with the ads I was running or the way I was positioning it. And I would have sat down with her and had a different conversation. Had the conversation about, all right, Cheryl, help me understand what you don't like, and let's talk about different positioning. And it means going and doing different photos, but it also different positioning that we both agree this could work. It just would have meant collaborating and coming up with it together rather than locking myself in my silo of I run marketing and I know how to put this together, so I'm going to blast forward with it. So stubborn. Sometimes people are stubborn. Sometimes they are being political. Sometimes they're being short-sighted or they don't have all the information. Sometimes people are just jerks. It happens. It happens. So how do we use conflict? How do we use conflict as an opportunity to better understand each other, to be more creative, and to drive more successful outcomes? That's really what I want to get to tonight. And I wanted to frame this. I think I shared some of this information with you guys in the ads, but I wanted to frame this with some statistics that I came across. I thought these were interesting. One of them is that employees spend almost 3 hours every week engaged in some kind of conflict at work, which racks up to about 150 hours a year, which racks up to nearly 4 weeks. Nearly 4 weeks of your life every year is spent navigating some kind of conflict at work. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of time. Think of what you could do with a month. Think what you could do with 4 weeks of actual productivity and a happy work environment. More efficiency. Less stress. 60% of employees, 60% of us do not receive any kind of conflict management training. So we're not even taught, we're not even trained. How do you manage conflict? How do you negotiate difficult personalities? How do you deal with it when somebody has a dissenting idea? We're not even taught how. So we fall back on old patterns, right? Old patterns that have served us through grade school and high school and college and all that good stuff. Almost 50%, so 49% of all workplace conflict is ego-driven or personality-driven. No shock there. Right? When we're stubborn, we're getting locked into an idea. We're protecting something. We're protecting something. 34% is due to workplace stress, and 33% is due to an overabundance of workload. That is lack of balance, which makes sense, right? Because if we have too much work and work, which then leads to work becoming stressful, we don't show up as our best selves. We're tired, we're cranky, we might get a little touchy in our responses. It creates stress. We don't make our best decisions. Now, what do these statistics tell us? So I just shared with you that stressful work environment, personality and egos, and lack of training are the culprits behind workplace conflicts. So what does that tell us? What does it tell us about the workplace? You know what it tells me? Workplace conflict is a totally fixable problem. Doesn't need to be what it is. Doesn't need to be 4 weeks of our lives every year. It's completely fixable. Because what if the 60% of employees who don't get conflict management training got some training? What if we could take our egos out of the equation and focus on outcomes? What if we had a balanced work-life pattern? What if we had a healthy work-life balance? What if we were happy at work and our workplace was just a happier, less conflict-ridden place to work? These are all solvable problems. Now, there is a cost. There is a cost to workplace conflict. The cost, so there was math involved. The math says, I'm going to read this because I'm not going to memorize these numbers. The math said $359 billion in paid hours if you average earnings on an hourly salary of $18 an hour. A lot of you are making a lot more than $18 an hour. So really, that's a lowball cost. $350 billion. That's paid hours of workplace conflict. The equivalent, if we total up all of our working employees, 385 million working days. That's how many days are spent in workplace conflict. How fun is that? It's a huge cost. It's a huge cost to any business, but it's also a huge cost to us, the individual. We are the ones navigating the conflict, carrying the stress, thinking about work when we shouldn't be, battling egos that don't need to be battled. So how do we turn conflict, how do we turn any sort of conflict in the workplace environment into something constructive, into creative problem solving, into an opportunity for connection with other people and with our teams? I've got 5 steps for you to do that. The thing I love about this is it's really simple. It's really simple. It's not always easy, but it's simple. And typically we're just resistant to doing these things because they go against the patterns that we're comfortable with, right? And pattern number 1 is when you are dealing with workplace conflict, when you've got somebody on the team, whether it's somebody who works for you or a peer or even a senior level person above you, when there's someone who is in conflict with everything else that's going on, what's our first reaction? Do you know what it is? We become an ostrich. We put our head in the sand. Right? We put our head in the sand. So you have to stop the ostrich. Step number 1 is stop being an ostrich. Stop putting your head in the sand, because avoidance of the conflict doesn't solve the conflict. It doesn't make it go away. And it actually increases the risk that you're going to have more conflict later on. And this is personal or professional. We know that, right? We know when we let the old hurt or anger or resentment simmer, it just blows up at us later. And usually there's 15 other issues layered on top of it now that we're also getting blamed for, right? This is what happens when we play the ostrich game. So when you are in a situation where there is clearly some level of conflict happening between you and someone else at work, you have to step back, not be the ostrich, and instead be curious. Be curious. Go to the person where you are sensing the conflict and ask the curious questions. There's no ego in this. There's no right or wrong in this. You are not being defensive. You are asking, help me understand. Help me understand what's going on here. Describe for me how you feel. Tell me more about what's going on and about this position that you have and how it's different than the position I have. It is amazing. It is amazing when we take time to listen to somebody else's point of view, how we suddenly realize we are not as diametrically opposed as we think we are. Oftentimes with the superficial surface level arguments, it seems like we are on opposite ends. But the minute you start having a real conversation about, okay, but what's anchoring me in this position? What's anchoring them in their position? And you start to see you have more commonality than you have conflict, but you never get there. You never get there unless you ask the curious questions. So step number 1, stop being the ostrich, ask curious questions, which means you have to do step number 2, which is you have to manage your gremlin, because the gremlin is where the ego is triggered. The gremlin is where we get that initial defensive reaction that says, but I'm right and they're wrong. It's where stubbornness kicks in. It's where that voice in our head says, you better not ask them to explain themselves. They're going to think you're dumb for not seeing their point of view. They're going to think you're being pushy because you're not accepting their point of view. The gremlin voice wants to stop us from having those conversations, because what if the other person gets mad or upset? Our childhood patterns don't allow us to upset other people. We're supposed to be nice. We're supposed to get along with everybody. So we have to manage our gremlin, and we have to understand when somebody presents their point of view, when somebody is presenting their perspective or their opinion and it doesn't agree with yours, what's being triggered in you? Why are you feeling defensive? Why are you feeling like you must be stupid or you don't have enough information? Or why are you feeling like they're stupid and they don't have enough information? Something gets triggered. We need to get clear on what is being triggered in us. Where does that come from? Because we know the triggers come from old patterns. Why is this old pattern coming up now? Because this old pattern is going to block me from having that open conversation, from asking those curious questions. So awareness around our gremlin and understanding I'm being triggered, what is that? Step number 3 then, when you have the awareness around what's being triggered and you stop the ostrich and you start asking your curious questions, number 3 is the listening. It's lowering your defenses. It's you proactively, consciously removing your ego from the situation and saying, all right, what are the merits of this perspective? I may not agree with it at all. I may 180%, 180 degrees decide Not it. Not it. Don't agree with them. But because I'm coming in with an open mind, I'm asking curious questions, and I'm going to put my gremlin away right now, I'm at least going to listen. I'm going to listen for what are the merits to their perspective. They're making some good points. What are they? When we can understand, right, their point of view, we do two things. One is we help validate the other person. We don't have to agree with them to validate. I understand your perspective. I understand now where you're coming from. It also gives us more information for us to explain our point of view and say, now that I understand yours, let me tell you where I'm coming from. And now we can negotiate the gap, because now I know what the gap is. The gap isn't this superficial big picture. The gap is actually here and here. But this other area over here, we got covered. We're good there. It allows us to problem solve. Step number 4, tap into your empathy. We're really good at this. We just sometimes overuse it. We sometimes overuse our empathy, and then we allow that become the barrier to us having the conversations we need to have. But at this stage where you have asked the curious questions, you've managed your gremlin, you've set your ego aside, now let's tap into the empathy. Because once you've heard them, you can also look at, okay, why does this person have this particular point of view? Why is this particular point of view so important to them? Why are they being stubborn and anchoring in to this viewpoint? When we can have empathy for the other person's position, and again, having empathy doesn't mean we agree, it means we understand. It means we can put ourselves in a position of saying, I see how you got here. I might still think you're wrong, but I see how you got here. I see how you got here. And because I put my ego aside, I can see the merits in the argument. I can see how you got to this place, and I can see the good points of the argument that you're making. I can do that. Which allows us to move to number 5. Negotiate. This is your opportunity to negotiate. Here's the deal. Anybody who's in conflict with you has no interest in negotiating with you if they're anchored here and you're anchored here and no one's listening. For you to step into positive conflict management, you've got to ask those curious questions. You've got to manage the gremlin, right? Manage your triggers. You have to set aside your ego and listen. You have to give merit to their perspective and give empathy to their perspective. And that allows you to negotiate. That allows you to say, I'm here, you're here. The good news is we thought we were here, but after this conversation, we're here. And because you've given the gift to the other person or persons of listening, of being respectful, of offering validation and empathy, they're going to be far more willing to negotiate with you and to hear your perspective, the merits of your argument, and to have some empathy and perspective about your particular position. You open the door when you do that. And what this allows us to do is use the improv principle, right? One of the best skills you can use in negotiation is the improv principle, which is the yes and. Yes, I see your point of view, and I'm going to build on top of that. And here's what I'm building. And that way you're bringing the two perspectives together. And even if there was some conflict in there, you're finding a way to build a bridge. And at the end of the day, that bridge, it's different than the argument that you started with. It's different than the argument your counterpart started with. It's something completely different and new and collaborative. Now, this 5-step approach does suggest, right? It's built on the idea that there is strength in the diversity of ideas, that there is power in the diversity of ideas. that our ability to tune in and listen to other people and what's important to them and their particular angle and approach is valuable to us. And so I think when we can look at the diversity of ideas as a strength and use that, it allows us to foster more communication, to foster more connection and collaboration among teams or among individuals. It allows us to have a new angle or a new approach on an old problem, because somebody else's perspective or idea, they might be looking at the same thing, but because of their experience, they have a completely different viewpoint on how they might negotiate that or manage that, which can be helpful. It's also an opportunity for learning, because you might still look at their approach and go, nope, my way is still better. And you might be right, but that's okay, because you've still opened your mind to the idea that there's a different path to get there. There's a different way. And maybe that new approach that you just learned, it might not be the best approach for this situation, but it might work really well in another situation that comes up down the line, and you're aware of it now. So the diversity of ideas allows us to expand the way we problem solve, not just in conflict, but also on our own. Now, the key to these 5 steps, right? Stop being an ostrich, right? Put on your big girl panties, but not everybody loves that. So put on your hat, put on your cowboy hat, right? And ask the curious questions. So get your head out of the sand and go find out what exactly is at the heart of this conflict. As you do that, you need to manage the gremlin voice that tells you either that you're wrong or they're wrong, right? That gives you all the negative thoughts about you and the person that you may have the conflict with. You need to lower the defenses, set aside the ego, look for the merit in their particular argument. That's 3. 4, tap into your empathy. Understand why they're holding the perspective they hold and why it's important to them. And 5, negotiate. Understand now where the true gap is, and if you can, use the improv principle that says yes and. Here's your position, and with my position, here's where we can go. So that's where we are tonight with conflict management, with taking a step back from being stubborn and instead taking our focus on what's the outcome. What's the goal we want to achieve? Because if I go back to my example in my unfortunate situation with Cheryl, who did not like the decision I made, it was 100% my decision. I wasn't wrong in that. But do I have regrets about my approach around that? Absolutely. Because if I had not been so stubborn about my way or the highway, and instead had gotten stubborn, had gotten committed to the outcome, and the outcome was driving revenue for the newspaper. We were running this ad campaign to drive more revenue for the newspaper. I was so much more focused on my approach being the right approach. I wasn't looking at what are other ways we could drive revenue for the newspaper that would work for both of us. All right. That is your Training Tuesday for tonight. Thank you for joining me for tonight around conflict management, being stubborn versus being committed, and 5 steps to conflict management. As a quick reminder, if you haven't signed up yet, tomorrow night is our master class. Tomorrow night's master class is going to be fun because I have that focused on a different level of leadership than what I've talked about before in this group. So we're going to be talking tomorrow about dynamic leadership. And dynamic leadership is really built on 3 core pillars of inspiration, intention, and influence. So I'm actually really excited about this because I've got some new material in here that I'm going to share with you guys about how do we step into dynamic leadership, what's the impact, and what I'm going to walk you through is the framework. What is the framework for dynamic leadership and what can that mean for you? So that is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. If you want to attend and you haven't signed up yet, you all should have been getting messages from me about registering for it. But if you haven't, drop, what's the word we're going to use? We're going to use dynamic. Drop the word dynamic in the chat, and I will send you the link to register for tomorrow night's masterclass. Again, Wednesday night That's tomorrow, March 15th, the Ides of March. I'm going to tell you all straight up too, like this ad campaign for me running for you guys to get you to come to this masterclass, I've made every mistake in the book. Initially on the landing page, I had it in October. Don't ask me why I wrote October. It was supposed to be March. It was always supposed to be March. I've never run it before. It never ran in October. It's not going to run in October. It is March 15th. I set up my texting system so that I could text you guys, and then it sent out the text on the wrong dates. It's a new CRM. I'm still getting used to it. So I'm going to thank you guys for your graciousness, because many of you have reached out to me to say, hey, what's that date? Hey, why'd I get this text? So I apologize. I promise you next time it will be lined up a lot tighter. But tomorrow is about inspire, influence, and lead. We're going to talk about the framework of dynamic leadership. I can't wait to see you guys there. So drop the word dynamic in the comments if you would like the link to sign up and you haven't yet. And otherwise, I will see you guys again tomorrow night. So thank you. Thanks, Joyce. I'm glad you're going to be there. And Sue, I'm excited. It's going to be a good time. All right, guys. Have a fantastic night.